What would have happened to the human race if Eve was the only one who sinned? You mean if Adam had simply said no to Eve and not ate from the tree? Exactly. God wouldn't have created a different woman for Adam just to remove sin. Because if God had done that, it would have played into part of what the devil was aiming for. How so? Because God had already declared that he was resting from his creation. He was on his Sabbath. So if God had created a new human to prevent sin from entering the world, it would have meant breaking his own Sabbath. Yes, but God in his wisdom crafted a plan where the devil would still be proven a liar and God would be proven true. So creating a new wife for Adam wasn't an option. No, it wasn't. Besides, it wouldn't have been necessary to do so. Why not? Because if Adam had simply said no, sin would not have entered the world. Let's look at Mary's example. Mary, the mother of Christ? Yes, she was imperfect, just like Eve, yet Christ was not born imperfect. Even though his mother was imperfect? Precisely. Now, if Christ's father had been Joseph, he would have been imperfect. But his father was God, and God is perfect, so even though the vessel through which Christ came was imperfect, Christ himself remained perfect. That's interesting. But it gets even more interesting. Modern science tells us that the blood of the mother does not mix with the blood of the infant in the womb. Really? Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, a mother with HIV can still have a child who is not born with HIV, as long as the birth happens via C-section to prevent contamination. So you're saying that a woman can carry a child without passing on certain things, like sin? Exactly. The woman is a vessel for the seed, but the seed itself does not become contaminated by the vessel. That's a deep thought. But now, let's go back to the question. If Eve had sinned, but Adam had not, would sin have entered the world? What does Scripture say? Well, Romans chapter 5, verse 12, sin came into the world through one man. And 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 21 to 22. For as by a man came death, Romans chapter 5, verse 19, by one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. Ah, so sin didn't enter the world because Eve sinned? No, it entered because Adam sinned. Why does the woman's sin not affect the offspring, but the man's does? Because if the seed itself comes from someone who has sinned, it will produce sinful fruit. That makes a lot of sense, but that leads to another question. Is woman made in the image of God? That's a tough one. I honestly don't know the answer, and I don't want to assume. What does Genesis say? Genesis chapter 1 verses 26 to 27 says that God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. But 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 7 says, a man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God, but woman is the glory of man. So man reflects God's image directly, but woman reflects man's image. That seems to be the implication, and when you consider that sin entered through Adam, it raises some interesting thoughts about the role of men and women. That's a deep discussion. It is. And it ties into the biblical family order. God is the head of Christ, Christ is the head of man, and man is the head of woman. So, the structure God put in place matters. Absolutely, God doesn't do things haphazardly. See, even in matters like vows, the Bible shows that a husband or father has the authority to revoke a woman's vow. Really? Where? Numbers 30 talks about it. If a woman makes a vow, her father or husband can nullify it when they hear about it. And if they don't object, then the vow stands. But if they annul it, God forgives the woman on account of the man because the man revoked it. I've never heard about this before. Indeed, many know nothing of this, and it also shows the responsibility men carry. If they hear the woman's vow and do not revoke it, the woman will have to bear the consequences of it. So, sin entering the world was really about Adam's choice, not necessarily Eve's. Right, Adam's choice determined the fate of humanity. Wow, that changes how I look at the fall of man. It sure does, puts a lot into perspective, doesn't it?